Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is my review of episode 5 of season 5 of Lower Decks, called Starbase 80, which was often mentioned across this whole show as the worst starbase in the entire Federation, so it was interesting to finally see it. And also, I think that in the spirit of Star Trek, they show that it's not completely hopeless, that it's possible to make it better, because, across the whole show, they've been implying that Starfleet keeps sending the worst officers, the worst personnel to that starbase kind of as a punishment, and so it's kind of a collection of the worst people on that starbase, and it's the most neglected one, and so on. And yet, in this episode, especially toward the end, they kind of show that it's basically made up of underdogs, and that with a little help, they can turn things around and make it better. So I really like that. And also there was kind of like a mystery across the episode in which you don't exactly know what's going on. There was kind of a disease that is turning people into zombies, and you assume that it's from that starbase, since they kept saying how many problems it has, and yet then in the end there's the twist that it actually came from the Cerritos, and there were clues to that. So I think that whole mystery was also done pretty well. So let me start from the beginning. When the crew returned from some away mission on a planet called Pisces 9, which is a funny name I think, and they were studying something under the water there. So the name Pisces is kind of funny in that context. And then we see those whales from navigation ops experiencing some kind of technical difficulties, and the ship is unable to go to warp, and so they have to go to the nearest station that they can reach with impulse, which happens to be Starbase 80. And then they say the starbase doesn't have working transporters, and so they don't have biofilters, and so the crew have to go to the decon chamber before going to that starbase, and that's an obvious reference to Enterprise. It's another example here when they do a good reference, but they kind of do it too much. They kind of break the fourth wall, because Boimler directly mentions the pole, and that kind of annoyed me, because we get it anyway. We see the gel, the decon chamber, we get the reference. We don't need it spelled out so much to break the fourth wall. Oh, it's exactly like the pole. Look, I'm rubbing myself like the pole. So that was kind of too much. I mean, other ships from that era also had the decon chamber, right? It wasn't just the Enterprise. It wasn't just T'Pol who was putting the lotion in that room, and so why make such a specific reference? Imagine if they also played the music from Enterprise in that scene to make sure we get it. So, just like in Alien Romulus, when they were mentioning things from other movies, they were playing the music from those movies just in case you don't get it, so it will jar your memory. And so that was kind of too much. And then they go into that starbase, and I liked how it looked like TOS basically. So it's an older starbase which never got any upgrades, and so most of the interior looks just like in TOS, and also some of the crew are wearing the uniforms that look like in Enterprise, and so I guess it's an even older starbase than TOS, and it was never upgraded. And I meet this officer called Cassia Knox, who seemed a little bit suspicious at first, because she seemed so optimistic despite everything falling apart around her, and yet she was so happy all the time, so it seemed a little bit fishy. But toward the end of the episode you realize she is simply such a person. She even says she volunteered to go there to help out because she wanted to. It's not as if she got some punishment to be sent there. And so that's what I mean when I say the spirit of Star Trek, because we have some characters in this episode that actually do good things to improve everything for everyone and so on. And we have some other references to Enterprise when the gravity plates don't seem to be working correctly in some parts of the station. And as I mentioned, everything is really similar to TOS with those colorful tubes everywhere, and they don't have comm badges. They have to use those wall communicators, and in the elevator you have to hold that handle to activate it. And the station also has a promenade, which is really similar to Deep Space Nine. And also they say half the station's population is made up of those Akamerians. That's a species of basically biker gangs or something like that we once saw in an episode of TNG called the Vengeance Factor. They were kind of like a group of refugees who don't have a home, and they're roaming the galaxy like criminals. And so as part of the Federation negotiations, they got settled on the space station. So it's kind of like the Bajorans in Deep Space Nine, who were most of the station's population, and they're kind of like problematic. But there's a scene in which they kind of seem threatening, but suddenly they turn nice. And so that's also a funny joke, which they also did in the past in this show, when they encounter all kinds of aliens which you assume are bad, and suddenly they're not so bad. And they also have this shop of older uniforms from previous Star Trek shows. And Tandy asks, how do you make these if you don't have replicators? And then that woman says they come from dead officers who are long gone or something like that. So that was funny. And also how Tandy is always so happy. So she hears it comes from dead people, and yet she's still fine with it. So that was funny. Then they go into some room to look for some technical manuals, and it was funny to me to see actual piles of old tapes lying around. It reminded me of how in TOS they always say how you have to go through computer tapes to find something. And then they're worried about how much time it will take them to go over all these tapes. And then Tandy says, don't worry, we'll divide and conquer. So each one of the team will focus on a different pile of tapes. And I was annoyed by that because I think once again they're misunderstanding this phrase. I complained about it in my reviews of Picard and Discovery because they also did that. We had scenes of them saying that the meaning is you have to break up your own team, which I guess maybe in the far future, maybe it actually did change in the language, maybe that is the actual new meaning of it. I do think in computer science they do use this phrase in this way that you have to break up a problem into smaller pieces to be able to solve it or something. So maybe in the future they actually did change the meaning of the phrase, I guess so. And gradually across this episode we see people from the Cerritos who are on the station who seem to be turning into zombies with glowing green eyes for some reason. And they did drop the clues from the beginning that the problem actually originated from the Cerritos and not from the station. Because when they were trying to contact someone from the Cerritos, he was making those noises when he was still on the Cerritos. So that was the first clue. And also we noticed that it seems to happen after someone uses their communicator, their comm badge, and it has like a little green electricity affecting the person, and later he turns into this kind of zombie. And yet it's kind of done in a way that you don't really know what's going on until the end, but when you do know what's going on, then it all makes sense because there were clues from it from the beginning. So that's why I did kind of like how this whole mystery unraveled, and it turned out in the end that it was an anaphasic life form like the one from the TNG episode Sub Rosa with that green ghost cloud thing that was trying to possess Dr. Crusher. So a similar creature is trying to possess people from the Cerritos, and it's doing that by going through the communication channels, sending its electricity over or whatever. It is similar to how it was shown in that episode of TNG, even though this entity seems to be way more powerful than the one from TNG, because in that one it was only able to take over the corpse of Beverly's grandmother and also affect Beverly herself, but just barely, not really able to control her. And yet here it seems to be controlling multiple people at the same time, even though I guess it's not fully controlling them, it's just turning them into kind of brainless zombies that kind of going around and licking everything and whatever. And meanwhile, the captain and first officer are trying to find the chief engineer of the Starbase to get that part they need to fix their ship. And they meet this guy who kind of looks and sounds like Gene Roddenberry, and he keeps sending them to different places on the station to look for the chief engineer. And on the way they have to fix all kinds of things on the station that he was unable to fix, and in the end it turned out that he himself was the chief engineer. So he was kind of tricking them into doing his dirty work for them. And one little plot hole in the episode was that he never actually told his first name when they first met him, and yet later when they meet him again at some other part of the station, they say his name is Gene. And yet he never told them his name before. I went back and checked twice just to make sure I'm not mistaken, and yes, he never actually said his name was Gene. And only later when they meet him again at some other scene, at some other part of the station, suddenly they call him Gene. So how do they know that's his name? And also when they see him again, they only see his butt coming out of some tube that he's trying to fix and he got stuck there or something. So how do they know that's even the same guy they met earlier? And they immediately say Gene? And yet he never said his name was Gene in the previous scene. So I think that's a pretty big plot hole in the episode. And then later it turned out he's actually the chief engineer that they're looking for, and he lied to them to get them to fix the station for them. And all of this kind of reminds me of that scene in Star Trek Discovery when they had a janitor called Gene, but it was done much worse in Discovery because there they had him literally scoop up human remains from the floor, and they were directly poking fun at him, at how they will never remember his name or something. They were poking fun at that janitor to his face, and his name was Gene, and so it seemed as if they're deliberately poking fun at the memory of Gene Roddenberry, saying how no one will remember his name or something like that. So that was really annoying. Here it's done much better because this guy actually seems likable and lovable and nice, and he's even though he is lying to them, but he's kind of doing it for the greater good because he's trying to get his station fixed because Starfleet is neglecting it. It's not sending any people to help out, so he's kind of using the opportunity to get these guys with the better equipment to fix parts of the station that he's unable to fix. And so he's kind of deceiving them, but he's doing it for the greater good. So overall, I don't mind this reference if it is indeed a reference to Gene Roddenberry, which I'm pretty sure it is because he actually even looks like him. And there's also a funny scene in which they have to go up the stairs 30 levels because the turbo lift is not working properly. And then Ransom actually enjoys that because, across the show, they've always been showing how obsessed he is with fitness and all of that. When they're going up the stairs, he actually enjoys that because he's getting a great glute workout. And then he says, "That's the power of stairs." And that made me laugh because I think that's a reference to Discovery when, Tilly was saying the power of math, people, and all of that. And then members of our team also get infected by that anaphasic energy. And we see that whenever someone touches a comm badge, and we see that green electricity, and later he also turns into the zombie. And they did it in a way that is not obvious. That's why I think it's clever. Like, you don't know what's going on when you first watch it. And that's just like those classic Star Trek episodes, especially in TNG, in which all kinds of weird stuff was happening, and you don't exactly know what's going on at first. And so that was one of the reasons I really loved the older Star Trek shows, when things were clever. They were not obvious right away. And also we see the station's doctor, who seems to be having that same condition that Geordi LaForge once got when some parasite from some planet was turning him into a different creature. So apparently that doctor also had the same parasite at some time, and yet he was able to stop that, and yet was not able to reverse the effects of it apparently, even though Geordi was able to come back to normal after being fully converted to that alien, and yet this doctor is kind of stuck as if he's still half alien and half human. And when Mariner asks what exactly is wrong with that doctor, she's being told that it's because he's British. So that was also funny. And when Mariner asks does he have one of those parasites from the TNG episode, he says, "How did you know? I was told it was hardly noticeable." And then Mariner wants to use her comm badge, and then that woman snatches it from her. And then Mariner says, "I knew that you were up to something," and so on, because she was kind of suspicious from the first place. And then they fight each other, and then that woman is really good at fighting, and Mariner asks, "How are you so good at it?" And then she says, "Because I'm El-Orion." And Mariner says, "Oh, so you're hundreds of years old, that's why." And then she says, "No, I'm 30. And then she says, "Then you're just like a regular person." So that was also kind of a funny joke, and also it kind of fits, that idea that El-Orions are kind of guiding people across the galaxy with their wisdom and all of that, and so it kind of fits this character, who's kind of like a young Guinan character who volunteered to go to that place to help out and so on. I actually think it would have been better if they did say that she was hundreds of years old and just looks young, because then that would explain why she's still wearing the Enterprise uniform and so on. So I think she should have been the only one still wearing that uniform, and they should have just said that she's 200 years old, and that's why she's so wise and so on. But then that joke wouldn't work. The whole joke is that she's bragging she's El-Orion, but she's a young one, and then Mariner says, then you're just a regular person. And then they fight each other until Mariner sees that Boimler was indeed converted to a zombie after touching his comm badge. And so she realizes that it did indeed start from the Cerritos and not from the station. And on the station they use wall comms, and so that's why they're not getting infected by it. Then they go back to the Cerritos to figure out what's the cause of that infection. And they bring that guy who makes corn dogs on the promenade, and he's able to distract some of the zombies to make way for the others. And it's funny how he put them up kind of like Wolverine's claws. That was funny. Then they get to Cetacean Ops, and they realize that the main part of that entity is inside one of those wells, and it's an anaphasic consciousness controlling his body. And the doctor's solution to it is to simply beat it up and force that entity out of it. And then they trap it in some kind of container and then talk with it. And it turned out it's not so evil. It was just trying to prove something to its superiors, that it was able to communicate with corporeal beings or something, and yet it kind of possessed too many people, and it spread itself too much, and it promises not to possess anyone else again, and so they allow it to stay on Starbase 80. And so that's kind of like, again, in the spirit of Star Trek, that the evil enemy is not actually evil, it's simply kind of misunderstood, and you can simply talk with it and negotiate with it and solve the problem and all of that. And then they decide to stay around the station a bit longer to help them fix some of their issues, and so they're fixing the gravity plates and all of that. So in the end, the lesson is that the Starbase is not as bad as they always thought it was, and that the people there are simply kind of underdogs and being neglected. And if you help them out, then they can solve the problems and all of that. And so that's why I really like this episode. I think it's really in the spirit of Star Trek, like in the older Star Trek shows. First of all, there's an interesting mystery that is not too obvious, even though there were clues to it all along. There are a lot of good jokes, there's a lot of humor, and it has that optimistic feeling of hopefulness in the end, that even though it's kind of a crappy place, it still has hope, and that if you just help out a little bit, if you just lend a hand, then it can make a big difference and all of that. So that's why I think the episode actually had a really good message, and so I think it's one of the best episodes of this season so far. So that's all I had to say about it. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss it all in the comments below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.